are only Fremen characters being gender swapped? Is it because the production feels that they can take liberties with Fremen characters simply because they are not as important as quote unquote main characters? I can hazard a guess and say that I don't.
You think the dentists are so different from me and you? They came to this country just like everybody else in search of a dream.
Wally from Jersey.
Yes, and now he's a full-fledged American.
Kramer, he's just a dentist.
Yeah, and you're an anti-dentite.
I am not an anti-dentite.
You're a rabid anti-dentite. Oh, it starts with a few jokes and some slurs. Hey, Denty! Next thing you know, you're saying they should have their own schools.
They do have their own schools.
I want to preface this by saying, I know if this gets back to the X person, they're going to misinterpret how I'm approaching the subject. That's fine. I understand. It is what it is. It seems with the YouTube space, you either have two categories: enemies or allies, or the way I'm trying to do things, which is I'm just going to react to stuff, study it within a context, and give my thoughts. Maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not. It probably won't work, and I'll have to do more clickbait stuff. And I know somebody's going to label this as that, but all I can say, this is my honest reaction, and I gotta say, this is mostly a hunk of garbage. So, apparently Secrets of Dune is really, really mad at Denis Villeneuve because there ain't enough Arabs in the Dune film. So, what's the strongest case here? Well, I think he did spot a legitimate mistake, and you're like, okay, but let's hear him speak.
I can hazard a guess and say that I don't think that the Dune production thinks that Fremen characters are important. Perhaps they think they can take liberties with that. They couldn't even get the names right of the two Fremen that were already cast in Dune Part 1. You had Elmi Rashid Elmi who played the Fremen Shamir, and you had Takia Newell who played Tanat. But in the film, when Liat Kynes addresses Shamir, Takia Newell answers, and when Liat Kynes addresses Tanat, Elmi Rashid Elmi answers.
Tanat, will you find still suits to fit our visitors?
Yes, Liet.
Shamir, coffee service, please.
Of course, Liet.
So I'm sorry to say, but someone screwed up. Whether it be the Dune editor or the sound editor, and someone missed it. This went through so many people and someone got it wrong, so it is a screw up. It shows a carelessness. It's almost like they don't care about these Fremen characters. I was going to explore an article with you written by Hannah Flint called Why Arab and Islamic Representation Matters in the New Dune, but the article seems to have disappeared. However, some YouTube channels have already covered this, such as Film and Page, and they did a good job of covering it. Hannah, however, has written other articles about this subject.
Alright, I think he's correct that Denis probably did mess up these minor characters. And I think if we're being serious, tampering too much with minor characters can have an effect on the story. You may not like these characters, you may not remember these characters, but they are characters in the story. Frank Herbert wrote the story. We should respect it at the level of, if he wanted these minor characters to do this or that, let's not stray too far from the text. Now, to be fair, Herbert did endorse the Lynch film, and that took a lot of liberties with Dune. But again, we know for a fact Frank Herbert did this. The only issue he had was with the ending. Otherwise, he had mostly praise for what David Lynch did. That's the record. With Denis Villeneuve, we're in an unknown space. So we don't know if Frank Herbert would approve of this. We know Brian Herbert approved of it, but what Frank Herbert would think is unclear. But to get to the main issue I think he's complaining about, I think he's just conflating two separate logical categories. There's this issue of MENA and Arab representation in the media, and it may shock people. I actually agree with him about 85%. I do think overall the representation of the Middle East and of Arabs and of those in North Africa tends to be pretty shockingly poor. We get these very demonic images of Arab terrorists or these dictators or just these victims of Israeli violence. That's basically it. We don't really ever get a full sense of their complex, rich lives. We don't really know that much about women in the Middle East or men in the Middle East. I do, because I take a lot of time to research things, but I think probably the average person has a very distorted image from Hollywood and the mass media. So I agree on that part. And perhaps raising the representation of Arabs and Middle East actors would help. But we're back to the simple dilemma. What does any of this fucking have to do with Dune? And as far as I can tell, he has a hidden hypothesis that, well, Dune is very Islamic. Dune takes a lot from Arab culture. That's true. Here's another thing. It takes a lot from Japanese culture. It takes a lot from Native American culture. It takes a lot from Chinese culture. It takes a lot from European culture. Yes, Dune is a very interesting, complex novel, mixing all these mythologies from around the world. You might say that Middle Eastern cultures or mythologies are more prominent. Maybe, maybe not. And I think he's done a lot of valuable work. I would recommend most of his videos, but I think Secrets of Dune, frankly, is overstepping his bounds, saying that writ large, what we're getting with Dune is a work of what? A white author, basically, the Fremen are Arabs. We're getting a Middle Eastern tale. We're not. We're getting a very interesting, complex mythology, partially rooted in Middle East history, and partially rooted in Asian history, partially rooted in American history, partially rooted in Native American history. We're getting a lot of histories and mythologies being combined in very fascinating, very intriguing ways, with, yes, a lot of political messages, and frankly, very anti-imperialist messages. So I don't think actually me or Herbert would disagree with his political intentions. I think where we're disagreeing on is the aspect of storytelling. What would the Arab representation of the actors have to do with the storytelling? It seems like you're still making a very simple, logical conflation between two separate issue areas. There's the issue area of how the mass media is, yes, unfortunately, largely racist and sexist, how it deals with Middle East and its politics and its peoples. That's a separate subject from Dune and its internal mythology. There is an overlap. Dune is about our world. Frank Herbert has said that. And Frank Herbert, by the way, did grow up with Arab friends. He grew up with Japanese friends. So he's met people from that side of the world. I don't recall him ever saying they had issues with how he presented the Fremen culture or Arab culture in Dune. I don't even think they even complained that, hey, where are the Middle East people? Where are the Arab actors in Dune the adaptation? I understand where he's coming from. He's raising legit issues in terms of the politics of Dune and how it's been adapted. That's perfectly fine. What does this have to do with Dune the mythology? Because at certain times he's slipping into saying, I don't think Denis doing justice to Frank Herbert's work. You're speaking for Frank Herbert on the basis of what? That you're from the Middle East? You're Arab? You know Arabic languages? That's valuable, perhaps invaluable to understanding Dune at a deeper level, but it's not the only thing that will let you understand Dune. Probably also need to study German history, study the German language, study European history, study Native American cultures, study Native American languages. You might also want to do that too. I think this video has noble intentions, it raises legitimate issues, but I do think its presentation, frankly, is mostly propagandistic and just trash and garbage. But if I'm going to be harsh to Nerdrotic and call him a racist, fascist Nazi, because he is, I'm going to say this presentation is also pretty politically stupid and propagandistic. It may be raising legitimate issues, but it's doing it in a way that is very manipulative and very distortive of Frank Herbert and mythology, and frankly, even distorting a lot of things with Middle Eastern history too, because I've studied that thoroughly. I could study more. It's a good video in terms of the issues it raises, but its presentation, I think, is insanely deceptive. That's all I can say about that. We'll do more on this because it is a very difficult topic, and it is, I think, a serious essay and a serious video, but I think at certain points it is very childish and really just appealing to emotion in the most cynical way. And I think that's as bad as Nerdrotic, that's as bad as Critical Drinker, that's as bad as Mahler, it's as bad as the usual alt-right morons. And the fact that I, quote, partially agree with the politics of what he's presenting is irrelevant. You're still deceiving people. And I think that's not legitimate when we're talking about Frank Herbert and Dune, in my humble opinion.